The late afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty highway as we argued. My wife, Sarah, tapped her manicured nails impatiently on the steering wheel. "There's gotta be a shortcut," she grumbled, squinting at the GPS. We were on a family road trip from Seattle to Yellowstone National Park, and a detour through a forgotten town called Hollow Creek promised to shave off a good hour. 8-year-old Liam, nestled between us in the back seat, piped up excitedly. "Ooh, an adventure." His enthusiasm did little to quell my unease. Hollow Creek wasn't on any map I recognized. The GPS's voice, usually chirpy, sounded suspiciously hesitant as it announced the turnoff. A narrow road snaked off the highway, disappearing into a dense forest. Taking a deep breath, I followed it, the silence pressing in on us. Minutes ticked by as the road wound deeper into the woods. Sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy overhead, casting an oppressive gloom. Suddenly, the trees thinned, revealing a sight that sent shivers down my spine. A deserted town lay before us. Weathered wooden buildings lined the dusty main street, their paint peeling, windows boarded shut. An unsettling stillness hung in the air, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of our tires on gravel. Liam pressed his nose against the window. "Creepy, huh?" he whispered, his voice laced with a nervous excitement. Sarah parked the car in front of a boarded-up pharmacy. An old-fashioned soda fountain sign hung crookedly above the entrance, its once bright red paint faded to a dull rust. Eerie mannequins, dressed in outdated clothing, stood frozen in shop windows, their vacant eyes seeming to follow us as we walked down the deserted street. Strange symbols, a crude combination of lines and circles, were spray-painted on the side of buildings. They sent a prickle of unease down my spine, an unsettling familiarity gnawing at me. I couldn't place it, but it felt like something out of a forgotten internet conspiracy theory I'd stumbled across years ago. The air grew thick and humid, and a low fog began to roll in, obscuring the outlines of the buildings. Visibility dropped rapidly, the streetlights flickering to life, casting long, distorted shadows. Panic clawed at my throat. "This is a mistake," I muttered, turning to Sarah. But as if in answer, a faint crackle filled the air. The car radio, which had been silent on this deserted stretch, sputtered to life. A distorted voice, barely audible over the static, crackled through the speakers. "Don't stay here. Leave now." I fumbled with the radio controls, trying to adjust the frequency, but the message repeated on a loop, each iteration more garbled than the last. Liam whimpered, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah clung to my arm, her knuckles white. We needed to get out. Now. But as I turned towards the car, I realized we were no longer on Main Street. The familiar buildings were gone, replaced by a labyrinth of narrow alleys. The fog had thickened further, reducing visibility to a few feet. The silence was broken only by the rasp of our own panicked breaths. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. This wasn't just a deserted town, it was a trap. Every instinct screamed at me to get us out of there. We stumbled through the maze-like alleys, the damp fog clinging to our skin like a shroud. Time seemed to lose all meaning as we wandered aimlessly, the echoes of our footsteps mocking our attempts to escape. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a faint flicker of light in the distance. It was the dashboard glow of our car, barely visible through the thick fog. Relief flooded my system. We had come full circle. We practically ran back to the car, fear lending us a burst of desperate energy. Sarah threw herself behind the wheel, starting the engine with trembling hands. I slammed the car door shut, and we were off, the tires squealing on the gravel as we raced out of Hollow Creek. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, a bustling truck stop on the main highway. The harsh fluorescent lights and the clatter of dishes were a welcome change from the oppressive silence of Hollow Creek. We collapsed onto boots, shaking and breathless. The waitress, a kind-faced woman with streaks of gray in her red hair, looked at us with concern. "Rough drive?" she asked, refilling our coffee cups. I hesitated, then told her the story, the creepy mannequins, the strange symbols, the fog, the radio message. She listened intently, her face turning pale as I described the symbols. "Those," she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. "Those are cult symbols they used to have a compound out by the old mine. Crazy bunch, always mumbling about the end times and the unseen forces." Sheriff shut them down years ago, but some folks say they still sneak back out there in the dead of night. The mention of a cult sent shivers down my spine. The radio message, the symbols, it all clicked into place. We hadn't just stumbled upon an abandoned town, we had wandered into the remnants of something dark, something that still held power. Over steaming mugs of coffee, we debated reporting what we saw. But to whom? And what would they believe? In the end, we decided to keep our encounter a secret, a chilling reminder of the hidden pockets of strangeness that exist on the fringes of supposedly normal towns. The rest of the road trip was filled with an unspoken tension. The playful banter we shared earlier was replaced by a cautious awareness. Liam, usually bouncing with energy, remained quiet, lost in his thoughts. We spent several days at Yellowstone, the breathtaking beauty of the geothermal pools and towering waterfalls offering a stark contrast to the chilling events at Hollow Creek. Yet, every time the fog rolled in, or we saw a group of symbols scrawled on a park restroom stall, Liam pointed them out, his voice trembling. The memory would return, a cold knot of fear in the pit of my stomach. Back home in Seattle, life picked up its usual pace. Work deadlines, school plays, grocery shopping, the everyday routine washed over us. Yet, the experience in Hollow Creek continued to linger at the edges of our consciousness. Then, one night, a news report on the local TV station caught my attention. It was a story about a series of bizarre disappearances in rural Oregon. People vanishing without a trace, their cars found abandoned on deserted roads. The reporter showed a map, highlighting the locations of the disappearances. As I stared at the screen, a surge of dread washed over me. One of the highlighted areas was suspiciously close to the turnoff for Hollow Creek. I switched off the TV, a heavy silence settling over the room. Sarah and Liam were in the kitchen, oblivious to the unsettling realization churning in my stomach. We hadn't escaped Hollow Creek unscathed. We may have physically left the town, but it appeared its grasp extended further than we ever imagined. The next morning, I reached out to the reporter who made the news story. It was a long shot, but I felt compelled to share our encounter. Whether it would make a difference, I didn't know. But one thing was clear, Hollow Creek wasn't done with us yet. The story remained a chilling secret, a reminder of the unseen forces that sometimes lurk in the shadows, just beyond the veil of normalcy. It was a secret we would carry with us, a bond forged in fear and the unsettling knowledge that some detours are best left untaken. Let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. The late-night drive back from Vegas was a blur of tired jokes and endless stretches of highway. My phone buzzed with a notification, 2:13 a.m. It was a long haul back to San Francisco, but the promise of our own beds and a fridge full of real food kept us going. Behind the wheel was Sarah, our designated driver and the most responsible one of the bunch. Next to her sat Mark, our resident prankster, already snoring softly. Jessica, usually glued to her phone, was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the window at the endless desert landscape. I rode shotgun, tasked with keeping the music going and navigating with my trusty, and slightly outdated, GPS. The road narrowed as we approached the imposing silhouette of the Redwood Pass Tunnel. It was notorious for being long, dark, and lacking cell service for most of the stretch. I braced myself for the inevitable complaints from Jessica. "Ugh, not this again," she mumbled, pulling out a well-worn paperback. "Can't they just build a bridge over it already?" As we entered the tunnel, the headlights cut through the inky blackness, revealing damp concrete walls and the faint shimmer of water droplets. The air grew heavy and stale, the only sound the rhythmic hum of the engine and the occasional drip of water. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the tunnel, sending shivers down my spine. We all glanced at each other, a flicker of unease crossing our faces. "What was that?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. The rumble subsided as abruptly as it began, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Then, the headlights flickered and died, plunging us into complete darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my phone, the dim glow a meter comfort in the suffocating blackness. "Sarah!" I yelled, my voice strained. "Can't you see anything?" Silence. Then, a muffled curse from the driver's seat. "My phone's dead too," she said, her voice tight with fear. Another rumble, louder this time, shook the car. Dust rained down from the ceiling, coating us in a gritty film. A high-pitched whine joined the cacophony, the sound of metal straining under pressure. "The tunnel, it's collapsing!" Mark shrieked, his voice bordering on hysteria. Jessica, surprisingly calm, fumbled in her purse. "My inhaler," she gasped. "I can't breathe without it." The panic was contagious. We were trapped, buried hundreds of feet beneath tons of rock and earth, with limited air and no way of calling for help. The claustrophobic darkness pressed in on us, the crumbling concrete noises a terrifying soundtrack to our potential demise. Sarah, her voice surprisingly steady, took charge. "Okay, everyone stay calm. We need to conserve oxygen." She instructed us to take slow, shallow breaths, a strategy one vaguely remembered from a safety video I once watched on a plane. It did little to quell the gnawing fear in my gut. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The air grew thick and stale, the dust clogging my throat. Claustrophobia began to set in, a crushing weight settling on my chest. I envisioned the tunnel collapsing completely, burying us alive in a tomb of concrete and rock. Just when all hope seemed lost, a faint flicker of light pierced the darkness in the distance. A glimmer of hope, a lifeline thrown in the abyss of despair. "Light!" Jessica cried, her voice choked with emotion. The light grew stronger, accompanied by the steady rumble of an approaching vehicle. A rescue truck, with its emergency lights slicing through the darkness, pulled up beside our car. Relief washed over me in a wave so powerful it nearly brought tears to my eyes. Tunnel workers, clad in safety gear, helped us out of the car, leading us to safety. We emerged from the tunnel, blinking in the harsh sunlight. The once imposing structure now looked like a gaping maw, rescue crews swarming around the entrance. Back in the ambulance, breathing in clean, sweet air, we shared stories of our near-death experience. It was a harrowing ordeal, one that would stay etched in our memories forever. Later, we learned that a tremor, a common occurrence in the area, had triggered a partial collapse in a section of the tunnel ahead of us. Thankfully, the rescue team had been conducting a routine safety check and were nearby when the incident occurred. We were lucky. Incredibly lucky. It was a harsh lesson in the power of nature and the fragility of life. As we drove away from the Redwood Pass tunnel, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a newfound appreciation for life settled over me. We had faced our fear, our mortality, and emerged stronger, forever bonded by the shared experience of staring death in the face. The drive back to San Francisco was quiet, punctuated only by the occasional nervous cough and the soft drone of the engine. The usual bickering and banter were replaced by a heavy silence, a silent acknowledgement of the ordeal we'd just been through. Weeks later, back in the familiar comfort of our own homes, the chilling memory of the tunnel collapse lingered. We started a group chat, aptly named the Redwood Survivors, where we shared memes about near-death experiences and funny stories to lighten the mood. But beneath the jokes and light-hearted banter, a thread of unease remained. Then, one night, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a message from Sarah, a link to a news article. My heart pounded as I clicked on it. The headline screamed, "Redwood Pass Tunnel Closure Extended, Safety Concerns." The article detailed a full investigation into the tunnel collapse and raised disturbing questions about the stability of the aging structure. It mentioned hairline cracks detected in sections not affected by the initial collapse, raising concerns about a possible complete closure. A cold sweat prickled my skin. We hadn't just been lucky, we'd narrowly avoided a much greater disaster. We exchanged messages in the group chat, a shared sense of dread hanging heavy in the digital space. Then, Jessica's message popped up, a single sentence, "Never taking the Redwood Pass tunnel again." It was a sentiment we all shared. The Redwood Pass tunnel, once just a mundane stretch of road, had become a symbol of our brush with mortality, a reminder of the unpredictable forces that can change the course of your life in a heartbeat. From that day on, our road trips took longer routes, scenic detours that added hours to our journey. It was a small price to pay for peace of mind. It was 11:42 p.m., a timestamp that was seared into my memory along with the suffocating stillness of the forest. My phone, perpetually out of battery thanks to a previous relentless session of Pokemon Go, mocked me from the passenger seat with its dead screen. I shouldn't have taken the shortcut. The GPS on my rusty Subaru had broken miles ago, forcing me to rely on a crumpled gas station map. The detour through Blackwood Forest promised to shave an hour off my trip from Portland to Seattle, a decision I was beginning to seriously regret. The paved road transformed into a dilapidated two-lane, swallowed entirely by the dense canopy of ancient spruce trees. The headlights barely penetrated the thick darkness, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced along the road. An oppressive silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional snap of a twig beneath an invisible creature. Then came the radio. He had been playing classic rock all night, a comforting soundtrack to the eerie landscape. But with a sudden crack, it fell silent. Panic clawed at my throat. The sudden absence of sound felt like a physical intrusion, amplifying the eerie stillness. A gust of wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it an eerie sound. A low, guttural murmur, like voices speaking an unknown language. It swirled around the car, a chilling chorus that sent shivers down my spine. I struggled to understand, but the voices were confusing, their whispers taunting, urging me to back away. The air became thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. A shiver ran down my spine and a primal fear took root in my gut. I slammed the car windows shut, in a foolish attempt to block out the invisible voices and oppressive atmosphere. Looking out the windshield, I swear I saw a flash of movement on the side of the road. A shadowy, twisted figure, barely noticeable in the darkness, seemed to melt into the trees as I focused on it. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat with growing fear. Another whisper, closer this time, right next to the car. A guttural screech, cold and slippery, that sent a jolt of terror through me. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Don't stop," a voice urged from the depths of your being. "Don't even slow down." Desperate to find any sign of civilization, I pressed the accelerator harder, the engine straining as it propelled me forward. The forest seemed to grow tighter, the trees coming closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the car like skeletal fingers. Every flash of light caught in the corner of my eye revealed another fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure, its grotesque forms taunting me from the darkness. Then, a clearing between the trees. Up ahead, a faint glow flickered on the horizon. Hope surged through me, a beacon in the suffocating darkness. I pushed the car even harder, the engine screeching in protest as I raced toward the light. As I emerged from the forest, the first rays of dawn painted the sky a pale orange. A small gas station, bathed in the warm glow of fluorescent lights, materialized before me. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. I stumbled out of the car, on shaky legs, and practically ran toward the brightly lit gas station. The assistant, a large man with a thick beard, looked at me with concern etched on his face. "Did you lose your way, son?" he asked kindly. I could only nod, still struggling to regain my composure. He poured me a cup of strong coffee and his silence was a welcome comfort. I didn't dare mention the whispers or the dark figures. Perhaps he had simply imagined it all, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the oppressive atmosphere of the forest. As the sun rose in the sky, dispelling the last remnants of darkness, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, it had been a trick of the mind. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of invisible eyes following me from the depths of the Blackwood Forest. One thing was certain, I would never again take shortcuts through ancient forests at night. That was terribly clear. It was after midnight and the deserted road stretched before me like a black ribbon. The radio was blasting my usual late-night playlist, a desperate attempt to ward off the growing fatigue that was gnawing at my eyelids. I was returning from a weekend getaway to the mountains of Oregon and the promise of my own bed was the only thing keeping me going. Suddenly, a flash of movement in my rearview mirror caught my attention. Headlights, a little too close for comfort. I looked, a beat-up white sedan, its grille barely visible in the darkness. "Just a night traveler," I muttered to myself, trying to ease the pang of unease creeping up my spine. But the car remained still, its headlights fixed, maintaining the same eerily close distance. I squeezed the wheel harder. I lightly pressed the brakes, hoping it would be enough of a push to encourage the driver to back up. Nothing. They got stuck to my bumper. Okay, this was getting creepy. I turned on the turn signal and pulled into the fast lane, hoping to lose them in the, admittedly non-existent, traffic. The car imitated my movement and stayed right behind me. Frustration turned into fear. Panic began to rise in my throat. I looked at the speedometer, 70 miles per hour. I was practically flying down the empty road, and this car kept up with ease. I put my foot on the accelerator, pushing the car to the limit, the engine moaning in protest. Still, the white sedan remained a constant presence in my rearview mirror. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. What was I supposed to do? At that moment, a red glow appeared in the distance, a traffic light. Relief flooded through my system, a ray of hope in the terrifying darkness. Maybe, just maybe, I could lose them there. As I slowed to a stop, I glanced at the car behind me. He stopped next to me and his headlights were pointed directly at my car. For a horrible moment, I expected a raging maniac to jump behind the wheel, but the car remained eerily still. Then, a primal scream came from my throat. The driver's side window of the car was down. But there was no driver. No head poking out, no angry face contorted with rage. Just an empty seat, bathed in the harsh glow of the streetlight. Terror paralyzed me. My breath caught in my throat and cold sweat rolled across my skin. The light turned green and the car next to me lurched forward. The empty driver's seat mocked my fear. I hit the accelerator hard and my fight or flight reflex kicked in. The car shot forward, weaving through the deserted streets, the driverless white sedan hot on my heels. I barely noticed the stop signs and red lights that I ignored, concentrating solely on getting away from whatever was chasing me. My phone, useless and without signal, lay forgotten on the passenger seat. All he had was the roar of the engine and the terrifying certainty that he was not alone. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I recognized the familiar streets of my neighborhood. With a desperate burst of speed, I turned into my driveway and slammed the car into park. I walked out with my heart racing and closed all the doors before collapsing on the porch steps. My body was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what I had just found, but the memory of the empty driver's seat seared itself into my brain. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe a prank, some elaborate scare tactic by a group of bored teenagers. But when I peeked out from behind the bushes, the white sedan was nowhere to be seen. The deserted street, bathed in the pale glow of the moon, seemed almost normal. Almost. The encounter left me shaken to the core. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the image of the empty driver's seat a constant reminder of the terrifying night. I never found a rational explanation, and part of me will always wonder what or who was behind the wheel of that car. It was 2:13 a.m., the air thick with the suffocating heat of a Nevada night. My beat-up Subaru rattled along the deserted highway, the only sound the rhythmic hum of the engine and the ever-present whine of the air conditioner struggling against the desert's relentless heat. Fatigue gnawed at my eyelids, a constant battle against the urgency of reaching Vegas before sunrise. Desperate for a distraction, I flicked on the radio. Static filled the speakers for a moment before a melody unlike any I'd ever heard bloomed to life. It was hauntingly beautiful, played on an unfamiliar instrument that sounded like wind chimes woven with mournful cello strings. The music was ethereal, each note a whispered promise of serenity in the harsh desert landscape. A sense of peace washed over me, an almost narcotic relief from the monotony of the endless highway. I found myself slowing down, the urgency to reach Vegas fading into the background. My finger hovered over the volume knob, tempted to crank it up, to fully immerse myself in the otherworldly melody. But something held me back. There was an unsettling quality to the music, an undercurrent of sadness that tugged at something primal within me. It was like a siren song, beckoning with false promises, with a beauty that felt dangerous. The GPS signal on my phone sputtered and died, replaced by a hiss of static. I glanced at the screen, just a blank white void staring back. Panic started to rise in my throat. It wasn't uncommon to lose signal in the middle of nowhere, but the timing, coinciding with the strange music, felt ominous. Another glance at the map revealed a terrifying truth: the familiar landmarks of the highway had vanished. I was on a stretch of road I didn't recognize, the endless expanse of desert stretching out on both sides, featureless and desolate. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the icy blast of the air conditioner. I tried to turn off the radio, but my hand seemed to move with a mind of its own, hovering over the button but never pressing it. The music grew louder, the melody reaching a crescendo, each note urging me forward. Then, in the distance, a shimmer appeared on the horizon. A mirage, an oasis rising from the parched desert floor. Lush palm trees swayed in a non-existent breeze, and a pool of water, shimmering like a jewel, beckoned with a promise of salvation from the stifling heat. The music reached a fever pitch, a beautiful yet terrifying cacophony that threatened to drown out my own thoughts. My hand twitched towards the steering wheel, steering the car towards the shimmering oasis. This was madness, I knew it, yet the power of the music held me in its grip. Suddenly, a jolt of adrenaline shot through me. A memory surfaced, a documentary I'd seen years ago about the dangers of desert mirages and how they could lure travelers to their deaths. That's when the music, instead of sounding beautiful, began to sound sinister, a deadly lullaby meant to lull me into a false sense of security. With a Herculean effort, I ripped my gaze away from the mirage and slammed my hand down on the radio button. Silence descended, broken only by the rasp of my own breathing. The landscape before me seemed to shimmer for a moment before resolving back to the familiar desolation of the Nevada desert. Panic subsided, replaced by a cold dread. I had almost succumbed to the siren song of the desert. My hand trembled as I picked up my phone and, thankfully, found service restored. With shaking fingers, I pulled up a map and navigated back to the familiar route, the haunting melody a distant memory. The rest of the drive to Vegas was unnerving. Every desert mirage I saw, every flicker of movement in the distance, sent a cold shiver down my spine. But I made it to the glittering lights of the city, the air conditioner a welcome comfort against the still-present desert heat. That night, safe in a hotel room, the memory of the mirage and the hypnotic music still haunted me. The desert had revealed its cruel beauty, a place where the line between reality and illusion could blur, where survival depended on resisting the seductive call of the unknown. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would never underestimate the power of the desert again.